is Jenny Doan? Well, if you clicked on this video, I am guessing that you know the basics. Jenny is a quilter, a main fixture of the Missouri Star Quilting Company, author, and a YouTube sew-lebrity. She loves to teach quilting tutorials on YouTube and focuses on easy to pull off quilts, often using pre-cuts. These tutorials were done with an eye for simplicity and not perfection. This alone is how Jenny changed quilting forever and made it a hobby that seemed much more achievable to the average sewer. But there is so much more to Jenny that you do not know. So join me as we do a deep dive into who Jenny Doan is, her rags to riches story, and the heavy trials she overcame in between. And if you stick around until the end, you will hear Jenny's most recent plans to step away from doing her YouTube tutorials. But first, hello, I am Tamara and I teach beginner sewing tutorials here on YouTube. Most of the time, these projects can be sewn in an afternoon, so if that interests you, then please hit subscribe. Now, let's jump on in to Jenny's life story. Jenny's childhood. Jenny was born in San Luis Obispo, California on June 11, 1957 to parents Frankie and Deanne Fish. Her father was a chemist and her mother was a homemaker and a certified Scandinavian genealogist. Eventually they moved to Spreckles, California, where her father would work for the Smucker's Jam Company. Jenny's favorite color is blue. She is left-handed and has a love for animals. This strong love for animals was cultivated early in her life. She had a pet dog, a pet cat, a bird, and even a chipmunk and a toad for short periods of time. Jenny's first interaction with a quilt was when she was a little girl and her mom asked a friend if she would sew Jenny a little blanket that she could wrap her dolls in. Of course, at the time, Jenny wasn't looking at this small blanket of 4 quilted squares as anything more than a toy and comfort in her life. Her love for quilting would come much later. For as long as Jenny can remember, she always wanted to sew. As a little girl, before she had any access to sewing supplies, she would try to piece fabric together using staples and tape. At the age of 10, her parents enrolled her into their local 4-H club and she learned how to sew clothing.
So I joined 4-H when I was 10 and I learned how to sew. So then what happened was, I sewed my whole life. It was for me, it was my underwater basket weaving. It was what I always went to. If I was stressed, I sewed. If I was happy, I sewed. Whatever it was. It was always something that I was busy doing.
At the age of 14, she was gifted her very first sewing machine. It was a Husqvarna Viking machine. At the time, fellow classmates loved to add embroidery to their chambray button-up shirts. So Jenny would use the decorative stitches on her new sewing machine to create a similar look on her own clothing. Jenny also had a passion for musical theater and loved to sing. As she began participating in musical theater, she also began sewing costumes for theater productions as well. Sewing these costumes became the creative outlet that allowed Jenny to hone her sewing skills. Moving on to Jenny's early adult life, Jenny has been married 2 times. She married the first time at the age of 19, and sadly, this marriage was an abusive one, which ended in divorce 3 years later. At that time, she became a single mother of 1 and was 8 months pregnant with her second child when she moved back in with her parents. Jenny had met her now husband Ron previously to her first marriage at the age of 17 while attending a church dance. But they went their separate ways after high school. Ron and Jenny reconnected after Ron returned from a church mission, and Jenny felt so comfortable around Ron that when she gave birth to her second child, she invited him to be one of the first people to hold the baby. Now, Jenny shares in this book here, How to Stitch an American Dream, the story between how her and Ron fell in love. And it is just such a sweet story, but it is a very detailed story that I could not even come up with a few sentences to share. So I highly recommend that you actually check this book out. I will have it linked in the description below, and you can read their love story for yourself. Both Ron and Jenny are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And although Jenny was scared to remarry, she saw that Ron was kind and could see a second chance at marriage with him. And not to spoil her book or anything, but Ron and Jenny get married. Ron and Jenny got married on April 18 of 1980, settling down together in California. Ron became dad to Jenny's first 2 children, and they also adopted Jenny's nephew. They also had 4 more children together, with a total of 7 children. The family order goes like this. Daryl is the oldest son, followed by Natalie, then Sarah, Hillary, Al, Jake, and finally, the youngest of the bunch, Josh. Now, Jenny is not afraid of hard work. Early on, she would sew all her children's clothing, and for a time, she homeschooled them. She was frugal as the budget was tight and would go to the grocery store with different lists. The first list would be for the must-have items, but she would have some backup lists that held items she could only hope for. In her most recent book, titled Quilting Through Life, which I will have linked in the description below, she mentions that at times she would only have enough money to buy potatoes. So she would throw a French fry party night that the children fondly think of to this day. This is a clear example of how Jenny's positivity and fighting spirit would help her to raise a happy family. But as time went by, it became too expensive to live in California, raising their 7 children. And in the early 1990s, when their youngest son Josh developed a tumor in his lymph gland, the medical bills nearly bankrupted the family. Thankfully, Josh was able to recover, but the family needed to move to a location where the cost of living was much lower, entering in financial strains and big changes. Both Ron and Jenny spent time in prayer over what to do next and felt God calling them to move to the Midwest. But Jenny resisted the idea of moving out of state, so they decided to move into a family member's basement to give them some extra time to figure out what to do. During the short amount of time that they lived in the basement, this space flooded numerous times in just a few months. The basement had never flooded before this time, and they took this as a sign that they needed to follow God's calling to Missouri. So, in 1995, Jenny, who was 37 at the time, and the family, excluding their oldest as he had already begun college, made the trek to rural Hamilton, Missouri, where Ron began to look for work. At the time, Hamilton, Missouri was a bustling town, with its claim to fame being the boyhood hometown of J.C. Penney. The family settled into a more than 100-year-old home. The house did not have indoor plumbing, so Jenny and Ron would boil water to make their children's baths warm. They raised chickens, shopped in bulk, and did plenty of canning to save money. It would take about 4 months for Ron to find a job, and this job was to be a mechanic for the Kansas City Star newspaper. But it would require him to travel an hour and a half each way to work. Even through all of that, Jenny had a very positive outlook on life. Ron describes her as joyful, positive, and loving. Jenny describes herself as a complete Pollyanna, always looking for the good things in life. Jenny had a background in musical theater and had always sewn costumes for theater productions. So when they relocated to Missouri, she hoped that she would be able to get a job sewing costumes there as well. But when she reached out to the local theater, she found out that they only did 1 production a year, which meant that they really did not need a seamstress. This is where quilting starts to take over. So Jenny needed to find an outlet for her sewing, and it was suggested to her that she join a quilting class. Now at the time, Jenny was not too interested, as she figured that would be an old lady's hobby. But eventually she did take that class, and when she took her first log cabin quilting class, she was hooked. She gifted her first quilt to her son Alan. I could not find a photo of that quilt, but this log cabin quilt was one of Jenny's earlier quilts, which she made for her son Jake. In 2008, when the stock market crashed, it had a huge effect on the town of Hamilton. They began to see nearly every building be closed down and boarded up. This market crash also had a personal effect on Jenny's family. Ron soon lost his job, and both Ron and Jenny lost most of their retirement savings. At this point, Jenny had been quilting for quite a while already and had made a quilt that she needed to have machine quilted. But the wait time to get this quilt long-armed in her area was a full year's wait. By this time, Jenny's son Alan had gone through university and was working as an entrepreneur. When Alan heard that Jenny waited a full year to get a quilt long-armed, he saw this high demand as a great business opportunity for his parents. Jenny had never long-armed before, but with her positive personality, she knew she could figure it out. So, between Alan and Jenny's daughter Sarah, they were able to buy a long arm machine for Jenny. And when that machine arrived, they realized it was so large it would need its own building. And since buildings were quite cheap at the time, they were able to buy a building to house this new machine. This was done, of course, in the hopes that it would give both Ron and Jenny enough revenue to allow them to live comfortably.
They actually got a quilt machine for me. And when the machine came, it was actually too big for our house.
Bought a building to fit the equipment.
The machine, yes. The building, it actually cost less than the machine did. So now we have a quilt machine in a building, so we have a business. So we put machine quilting up on the front window, and my husband and I stood there one day and we thought, so this is our retirement. This is what we're going to do, you know.
Now, their son Alan, being the computer whiz of the family, knew enough about the internet and how searches worked that he encouraged them to come up with a business name that was clear and easy to find. So they figured the name needed to have the word quilt in it, along with their location. Thus, Missouri Star Quilt Company was born. They placed a few ads in the newspaper to let people know about their new business, but did not have much money to spare for marketing. So a few months into their brick and mortar store being open, their son Alan suggested that Jenny do some free quilting tutorials on YouTube to create an educational hub and marketing avenue for their business. And this became the launching pad of their now thriving Missouri Star quilting business. As of now, 2024, on their website Town Map, there are 20 Missouri Star shops listed. From different quilt shops to a retreat center and educational center, they seem to have grown in a way that only Chip and Joanna Gaines can relate to. The Missouri Star quilting brand has become so popular that people travel from all over the world to visit Hamilton, Missouri. Missouri Star has slowly changed the small town of Hamilton into a thriving quilting destination. Something that Jenny holds close to her heart is the connections she has made over the years with those who reach out to tell her how much she has impacted them.
When people meet me, a lot of times they'll tear up. And I'll just look at them and I'll say, we've been through something, haven't we? And they'll go, yes. You just have no idea. You know, the stories and the letters are just jaw-dropping.
But Jenny isn't just a quilter. Like many creative people, Jenny has many hobbies. She enjoys acting and singing, loves musical theater, enjoys watching sports with her family, has done plenty of scrapbooking, is an avid reader, and enjoys watercolor painting. She loves to take care of houseplants, enjoys the outdoors, including gardening and camping, and I would even suggest that learning itself is a hobby of Jenny's. She continues to take classes to learn new skills such as pottery and even beekeeping. She used to love biking and hiking, but after having to heal from breaking her legs, she has been hesitant to continue those two hobbies. As a matter of fact, if you look closely at her earliest videos, you will see that she has crutches in the background as she broke her leg filming one of her very first YouTube tutorials. Jenny also enjoys knitting while watching NCIS or other action shows along with her husband Ron. Jenny is also quite the collector of items. She collects Fiesta-ware dishes, blue and white dishes, little birds, Dala horses, toy sewing machines, irons, and so much more. Another thing Jenny loves to do is host a themed family Halloween party. Since her early sewing career was a costume sewist, she is amazing at whipping up costumes, and each year her family chooses a new theme. One year was Harry Potter themed, another year food, and recently they did a Barbie-themed Halloween party. And with 27 grandchildren, I'm sure these parties are a riot. In April of 2020, Jenny and Ron celebrated their 40th anniversary together. And when asked if Jenny had any newlywed advice, she said, "It's hard work to stay married. Give it your all. People become what you believe they are. So make sure to tell your spouse how wonderful, kind, and handsome he is, and he will become it. Words have great power." And when asked what her definition of happily ever after was, well, Jenny said, "Being happy where you are, no matter what your circumstances are, and that's us." And to be honest, as I did my research for this video, that seemed to become a very strong through line in Jenny's life. She has chosen to be happy in all circumstances, even when things have been very difficult. In the podcast, Quilter on Fire, she was asked what brings her the most joy in her family life, and this is what she shared.
my family, my children, we're close, we get together. You know, everything that we do out there doesn't matter as much as everything that we do right here. And as a mom and as a family, we've worked very hard to make sure that nothing is more important than our relationships.
Jenny and Ron have also begun to enjoy some traveling now that the company is thriving, and the first place on Jenny's bucket list was Alaska. These days, they continue to travel together to wonderful destinations. Now, we are not quite done sharing the life story of Jenny Doan, because as of April 30th, 2024, she has recently made a huge announcement on her YouTube channel, and this will involve more travel.
So when Ron was a young man, he served a mission for our church for 2 years, and we have always wanted to do that as a couple. And guess what? The time has come, and we would like to serve mission.
This is not a permanent step away from sharing her tutorials, but rather a 2-year hiatus, with the YouTube channel being left in very capable hands. So this brings us to the present. And even though I called this a deep dive into Jenny Doan's life, I must admit that what I share here today is just skimming the surface of Jenny's life stories. Now, of course, don't forget, I did share with you in this video about these 2 books here that Jenny has written. This one is a biography style book. It is a fascinating read. By page 2, my jaw was hanging open, and by page 27, I was crying. So I highly recommend that you read this. This is a true deep dive into Jenny's life. And then this one is an awesome book. It has a lot of different quilt patterns in there, easy quilt patterns that you can sew. However, there are 9 chapters in this book that she shares more about her life, and what she shares in this book, she actually doesn't share in this book. So if you've read this book, but you want to know more, then definitely check this one out, or if you want to sew some quilts, definitely check this one out. Now, I do have a question for you. If you liked this style video, please let me know in the comments. Who should I do my research on next? What sew-lebrity are you curious about, and would you like to hear a deep dive on? I have a few in mind, but I would love to hear from you who you are interested in as well. Please hit that subscribe button if you're interested in beginner sewing tutorials or fun little short projects, and I will see you soon. Bye for now. Happy sewing!